Ooh. Oh, okay. So like Sarah said, I'm talking about nutrition post-stroke. And so before I get into, let's see, the actual presentation, just wanted to share a little bit about me. I have a bachelor's degree in dietetics, a master's degree in dietetics and nutrition, and I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, licensed in the state of Kansas. And currently I work as a clinical dietitian at the University of Kansas Health System. So today I'll be talking about nutrition-related risk factors for stroke. And so those will be controlling blood pressure, controlling blood cholesterol, maintaining a healthy weight, how swallowing difficulties or dysphagia plays into this, talking about processed foods and what that means, how to read a nutrition label, and then sharing some online nutrition resources. And my video is covering my words, so let's see. Some risk factors that are related to nutrition are high blood pressure. So when you have high blood pressure, this can cause the arteries to supply the blood and oxygen to the brain to burst or be blocked. Also having high blood cholesterol can build up in the inner walls of your arteries and become clogged and narrow, which reduces blood flow. And also having excess fatty tissue is associated with a higher risk of stroke. And so these three components are related to diets high in sodium, saturated fat, and added sugars. So how can you control your blood pressure through diet? The big one here is limiting the amount of sodium in your diet. So sodium is just the chemical name for the salt that's in your foods. So the biggest thing is not using that salt shaker at meal times, because it's been found that majority of the salt that we're adding to our foods is adding that at the table. Additionally, you want to limit the amount of salt that you're adding during the cooking process, limiting the amount of times that you're going to restaurants and fast food, because the way that restaurants make food taste good, one of the ways is adding a lot of salt to it. So even if it might be something that normally at home isn't a super salty food, usually the version at a restaurant or fast food is pretty salty. So the goal is to stay under 2,000 milligrams of sodium per day. And when I talk about the nutrition labels later on, I'll show how you can find that on the label. And so a good goal is to stay under for a serving of a food is to stay under 300 milligrams of sodium per serving. So if it's getting higher than that, it's really going to add up quickly and you're going to be shooting past that 2,000 milligrams per day. Another thing you can do is to eat plenty of fruits and vegetables. They're high in potassium. Fruits and vegetables in general are great, but especially those ones that are high in potassium. And so those are foods like bananas, apricots, oranges, cantaloupe, apples, spinach, zucchini, tomatoes, potatoes. So if any of those foods in that list sound good to you, those are especially good ones to include in your diet. And lastly, including fat-free or low-fat dairy products into your diet. So this could be in the form of milk, yogurt, low-sodium cottage cheese, or just regular cheese. And so the dairy products are going to be providing potassium and then also calcium into your diet. So if you've regularly been adding salt during the cooking process, you might wonder how you can still add flavor and make your foods taste good at home. And so there's a variety of ways you can do that. One is to utilize fresh or dried spices and herbs to create flavor. So there's really no wrong answer with that. It's just finding a combination, trying out new things. Additionally, you can use store-bought salt-free or low-sodium seasonings. So some of you might have heard of Mrs. Dash salt-free seasonings. They started out with just the, not sure if you guys can see my pointer here or not, but this original blend one with the yellow cap on it. But they really expanded, and there's a chicken one, a Fiesta lime. I know not pictured here, but there is a taco seasoning. Finding those seasonings that are lower in sodium are really beneficial. And then avoiding seasonings that have salt in the name. So a great example of that is garlic salt. So instead, it would be better to use garlic powder, or even just using fresh garlic or minced garlic, something like that, that's not going to have the salt in it. So for controlling blood cholesterol, a lot of it is the types of fats that you're eating. So you want to limit the intake of saturated fat and trans fat. And so saturated fat are the ones that are found in fatty meats, whole milk, butter, cream, palm or palm kernel oil, and coconut oil. So not that you can't have these foods in your diet, but you want to be having smaller amounts of them. And then trans fat are those are the ones that aren't naturally occurring, and they're made chemically. And so these are foods made with hydrogenated oils, and you might find them in fried foods, crackers, chips, and foods made with shortening or stick margarine. An interesting thing about trans fat is that food companies are being required to eliminate trans fat in their foods. So soon you won't have to worry about it, because foods just won't have trans fat in them. But currently some companies still have a little bit of trans fat. So you need to be looking for those and avoiding those foods. You'll want to choose unsaturated fats. So these are considered the heart healthy fats. And these can be found in the form of soybean oil, canola oil, olive oil, sunflower, and vegetable oil. So basically all the oils except for palm kernel oil or coconut oil. And so these ones don't have the way that they're formulated. They don't get clogged up in your arteries in the same way that saturated fats and trans fats do. So if you're at home cooking something and maybe you regularly use butter, switching to olive oil or vegetable oil, one of those oils would be a better option. The next thing is to increase your fiber. So the average American is not getting anywhere close to the recommendations for fiber. So any amount that you can add into your diet is great. So a good goal would be 20 to 30 grams of fiber. I'd say probably most people fall in the under 10 range unless you're really focusing on it or are doing like a fiber supplement at home. To try and get to that goal of 20 to 30 grams, you could include 2 cups of fruit a day, 3 cups of vegetables, and 3 ounces of whole grains. And so if that doesn't look like what your current eating habits are like, don't worry about it. Even just adding in a cup of fruit or a cup of vegetables a day would be beneficial for your health. When you increase the amount of fiber in your diet, you also want to make sure that you're making sure you're drinking plenty of water, because the fiber, when it's going through your GI system, it needs water to have its effect on your health. And lastly, increasing omega-3 fat consumption. And so common ones are finding this in salmon, tuna, mackerel, sardines. So those are the fish varieties, and then in ground flaxseed oil, or walnuts. So the thing that you need to just look out for, though, is if you are having salmon or tuna, sardines, anything like that in the canned variety, be on the lookout for a low sodium variety, because when they can the foods, they're including a lot of salt to preserve it. So either choose the fresh or frozen or the low sodium canned version. So this page just kind of sums up the different kinds of fats I was talking about. So the goal is to have more of these green fats, so especially your omega-3s, omega-6s, and then those mono unsaturated fats, and having fewer of the saturated fats, and then avoiding those trans fats, which are found from the hydrogenated oils. Another aspect of preventing your risk of stroke is maintaining a healthy weight. So I just kind of want to talk briefly on this, because weight is a very individualized thing. There's kind of some broad recommendations, but everyone is very unique. And so there's no specific weight that people need to be at. Each person has a healthy weight that's different for them. But in general, increasing your lean body mass, so reducing your excess fat mass will be beneficial for stroke prevention. So sometimes with stroke, it affects your swallowing abilities. So you might have been diagnosed with dysphagia. And so if you've been told by your doctor or your speech language pathologist that you need to be doing thickened liquids or modifying the textures of your foods, all the same nutrition recommendations I was just talking about apply to if you're on a regular texture diet or if you have modifications. Depending on what your recommendations are, may have to be a little creative with how you still get those foods, but it is all the same things. And so Sarah had let me know, I'm not sure if this is kind of the same group that was at the previous meeting or not, but she said that a kind of hot topic was talking about processed food. So I wanted to make sure to include a couple slides on that to kind of clear up what that means. So processed foods is really a broad definition. So it means whether foods are washed, cleaned, cut, heated, pasteurized, frozen, dried, mixed, but then also if something is added to it. So like a preservative or flavoring, some additional food additives like adding salt or sugar or fat to it. So it really depends on the level of processing. So kind of, you've probably heard before, oh, avoid processed foods. Well, some of those processed foods can be just as healthy and can provide you convenience without sacrificing health. And so I'll talk about that more on the next slide. So this kind of goes from the most minimally processed foods to the most heavily processed foods. And so these first two rows are talking about foods that are considered processed foods, but are still very healthy for you. So example, that might be bagged spinach that's already been, they've chopped the ends off for you, they've washed it, and it's all ready for you in a bag. Or example of pre-cut vegetables, or nuts that have been roasted, things like that, where it's still pretty similar to its original natural state of how it was found in the ground or on the tree, but it's provided some convenience for you as the consumer. The next level is a little bit getting away from its natural state, but still pretty similar. So examples of that might be canned foods or frozen fruits and vegetables. And so these were, especially in the case of frozen, they're packed at the peak nutritional quality. So if anything, they can sometimes be healthier than fresh foods because you're catching it at that most peak time of quality. And so then the next would be when they start to add in flavoring and textures. And so this kind of depends on the food of the aspect of health, because if you're just adding in some spices and a little bit of oil to it, it's still going to be very healthy. But it's when that list kind of starts to become pretty long is when it starts to become concerning. Then the next level would be ready to eat foods such as crackers, chips, and deli meats. So this is kind of getting into the section of foods that you want to limit. You can still have them, but trying to not have them every day, or maybe if you are having them every day, once a day. So you can kind of think of like, for example, the crackers, how it is compared to the wheat that's used to create it. It's pretty different than how it looked when it was harvested as wheat. And then the most heavily processed foods are those that really are kind of, you're not going to find anything like it of how it's grown naturally. Still something that you don't have to avoid completely, but want to minimize the amount of times you're having it. So these would be examples of like frozen pizza and microwave dinners. And another example of this is kind of, you can think of it how like an apple is. So an apple is found on a tree. And then if you process it a little bit, you might have pre-cut sliced apples. And then you might have applesauce where it's been mashed up and added some sweetener to it. And then apple juice would kind of be in that similar where you're adding in, they've pressed it and they've gotten just the juice out and they've added some sugar. And then you're getting into like apple pie filling where they've added in a lot of other stuff to it. And then like the last thing would be probably like apple candy, where the amount of apple that's in it is very, very small, if probably not any. So that's kind of an example of the level of processing. So how to read a nutrition label. So if you've never looked at it, it can kind of be confusing, but once you know the key things to look for, it's really not too difficult to find the information you need. So the first thing you want to look at is the serving size. So this is going to be very important because oftentimes we don't eat what the serving size is. So like, for example, this label here that is under A, their serving size is 2/3 cup. So you might eat 1/3 of a cup, or you might eat double the serving size, so 1 1/3 cups of it. So you need to be looking at that serving size to know what the numbers on the label correlate to what you're actually eating. So if you did eat this actual 2/3 cup, all these numbers would apply, but if you're having double it, you're going to have to double all these numbers. So it'd be 16 grams of fat, 2 grams of saturated, still would be 0 grams trans fat, and so on. And so not always, but sometimes, especially foods that the food companies know that you're going to be potentially eating the whole container or including the whole container in a recipe you're using, they'll include this per container label. So they've kind of done the math for you. So you don't have to double it yourself. They've just 5 to 10, 2 to 4, 220 to 440. When you're looking at the label, if you ever see that double column, that's what it's showing, the per serving and the per container. So the next thing that you want to look at is you want to be focused on this left side of the label. These percentages over here, while they can be a little helpful to kind of give you a gauge of what you're looking at, the percentages are the percentages are for someone that's eating a 2,000 calorie diet, which is a good kind of reference point, but the majority of people don't need exactly 2,000 calories per day. Some need higher, some need lower. And so those percentages are really only accurate for someone that's right in that 2,000 range, which most people aren't. You'll want to look at the actual numbers. And so I put some goals over here on the left side of the slide of how to kind of understand what those numbers mean. So I already talked about earlier that for sodium, you'll want to stay under 300 milligrams of sodium per serving. So this food, I just picked a random label, so I'm not sure what this actual food is, but is 160 milligrams per serving. So this would be considered a lower sodium food. And so you could even have 2 servings of this food and you'll still be well under your 2,000 goal. And it becomes concerning when it's like 1,000 milligrams and you might have a serving of it and then you only have 1,000 milligrams for the rest of your day. So that's how that sodium kind of adds up. For trans fat, you'll want to have 0 grams. So this food is a great example of one that has 0 grams of trans fat. For added sugars, you'll want to stay under less than 10 grams of added sugars. And so this number can be found the third line under total carbohydrates. So oftentimes when I'm doing educations, people kind of get a little confused on this section here. So you have your total carbohydrates. And so that is the number of carbohydrates or carbs in the food. And then dietary fiber, total sugars are coming from that 37. So 4 grams of the 37 are fiber, 12 grams of the 37 are sugar, And then 10 grams of that 12 that's still under the 37 are coming from added sugars. And so added sugars are any time that honey or like white sugar, brown sugar, anything like that is being added to a food. So if you're looking at seeing total sugars 12 and then added sugars 10, that other 2 grams of sugar might be coming from fruit or something that's like a natural sugar that wouldn't be considered adding the sugar into it. So a good goal for the day is to stay under 50 grams of added sugar. And then fiber, I've talked about a little bit before. A good goal per serving is 3 grams or more of fiber. So this one is 4 grams, so that's a great source of fiber. I would say be hesitant if you see something that says it's like 15 or 10 grams of fiber, because that is a lot of fiber per food. And your intestines might not like you too much if you're trying to put all your fiber at one time. It's best to spread it out throughout the day so that you have regular bowel movements. And then the last part of the label that's kind of sometimes not focused on too much is that ingredient list. And so oftentimes it's found either at the bottom of the label or off to the side, but it'll be somewhere on there because companies are, if you're getting, there's a couple instances like bakery items don't have to have the full list of ingredients, but for the most part, all foods that are packaged will have a full list of the ingredients that went into it. So in general, the less the better, but that's not always the case. For example, there is a frozen muffin that I had recently that it has some vegetables that are packed into it. And so the list of it, of ingredients actually was getting pretty long, but it's because they're hiding a little bit of carrot in it, a little bit of zucchini in it. It had some cranberries in it. The list was getting long, but it was good things on the list. And then for breads and pastas, if you're looking for a whole wheat or whole grain pasta or bread, the key is to seeing if it says whole wheat flour or whole grain wheat flour as the first ingredient. That's sometimes you might see that on the front of a package, it says a whole grain food. But if you look at that ingredient list and it doesn't actually say whole wheat as the first ingredient, you're not getting all the aspects of the wheat, which is the bran, the endosperm, and the germ. And so all those have different nutrients and minerals in them. And so if you can get all aspects of it into your food, that's going to be a healthier food than one that has flour that's not the whole wheat. And then lastly, you want to look for avoiding foods that say they're made with partially hydrogenated oils, because this is the key word for if something has trans fat in it. And so next, I wanted to talk about some great resources that are on the American Stroke Association website. And so that's stroke.org. I'm not sure if those that are watching today are familiar with that website, but I highly recommend looking at it if you haven't before. So all these things that I'm talking about today are found on the, if you go to their homepage and then click on healthy living and then healthy eating, they're all found within there. So the first thing I want to point out is the American Heart Association has cookbooks that they've made or they recommend. And so these you do have to purchase, but if you really like having paper cookbooks that you can look through and look at all the pictures and have in your own kitchen, then this is a great resource because it provides you a link of exactly where to purchase it or where to go in stores. So the examples here are diabetes and heart healthy meals for two, adding color into your cooking, some sodium smart recipes, using an Instant Pot, and then a slow cooker. But these were just a couple of examples, but there was lots of them available. The next is some Eat Smart infographics. And so while I talked about kind of a variety of things during this presentation, there's so many more things to nutrition. If you're wanting to learn more or find some more information about things that I talked about. So once again, these are just a few examples of the ones that are available. So ways or reasons to add more color into your diet, talking about added sugars. So if when I was briefly talking about added sugars, if you're having questions about that and want to learn more, there's a whole bunch of infographics available about that. And then this talks about how to get those heart healthy fats into your diet. And this last one here is the American Heart Association heart check mark. And so when you're at the store and looking for foods, if you see that check mark on the food, that is showing that that's a great food to choose. I will say there's a bunch of healthy foods out there that don't have that check mark, but if you see it, you can know that that's a great one to choose. Another thing on the website is cooking skills videos. So if maybe you are eating at restaurants a lot or doing frozen meals, but are wanting to learn about cooking, but not really sure how to do it and kind of need some guidance, a great thing would be watch these cooking skills videos. Or if you don't see, you're trying to learn something, but you can't find it on this website, even just doing like a YouTube search. There's a lot of great videos out there that can show you how to do things and learn a new trick in the kitchen. And then lastly, there is a whole bunch of recipes that are free and you don't have to purchase a cookbook. So as long as you don't mind finding it online and maybe printing it out yourself, these are a bunch of healthy recipes that are going to be following all those nutrition recommendations I was talking about, but still going to be tasty and yummy and look pretty and all that. So these were just a couple of the ones that they had highlighted, but there is lots of them out there. So if none of these sound good to you, I encourage you to look at the website and see if there's any yummy recipes that stand out to you. And so that is my presentation, but I wanted to leave lots of time for questions because Sarah had told me that nutrition is a popular topic. And so I want to be able to answer all the questions that you guys have.